everyone, this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with my May wrap-up. So the first book that I finished in May was The New Moon with the Old by Dodie Smith. This was published in 1963, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So this novel starts out when a woman named Jane Minton gets a job as a secretary for this man named Mr. Carrington. So she goes out to his English country estate to live with him and his family and be his secretary. Shortly after she gets there, however, Mr. Carrington flees the country because of fraud, and he leaves Jane with his 4 children to kind of take care of themselves. His children are older, 3 of them are in their 20s, and then the youngest girl is a teenager. So they all must find ways to make money now that they have no one to take care of them, and so each character goes their own separate way, and they all get unusual jobs and start to find their own way in the world. The novel is told from different perspectives, so you get the perspective of each character, which is always a device I seem to love. The ways of old England are kind of set against the changing times, although this novel is very quaint for the 1960s. You don't really feel when you're reading it that this is taking place in the 60s. Each of the children in the beginning of the novel, they each have their own talent for the most part, and they spend their days trying to work on their talents and whatnot. But then when they're all thrust out to the world, they realize that they first must experience life in order to contribute something to it, which I thought was really cool. My favorite character in this and perspective was that of the oldest daughter, Claire. She was different from her other siblings. She wasn't as talented, and so for her to find her own way was a little bit different. Some people reading this these days might find Claire's perspective a little old-fashioned, but I really liked Claire's perspective, especially because she didn't feel like she was talented, and she's just meant for a different life than her siblings were. So I really enjoyed this. This was very, very quaint and charming. This is my second novel by Dodie Smith, the first being I Capture the Castle, and I Capture the Castle still remains one of my favorite books of all time, but I really enjoyed this as well. Dodie Smith is just the best at doing the charming English novel of the mid to also a bit early 20th century. So that was The New Moon with the Old. The second book that I read this month was my poetry collection for the month, which was Why God is a Woman by Nin Andrews. And this was published in 2015, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. This is a collection of prose poetry that is about an island where women are the dominant sex. So it kind of turns our current day gender issues on its head, with men as the victims in this case. Now, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and it was kind of a weak 3 out of 5 stars, to be honest. I sometimes have trouble rating things that could be 2 or 3 stars. But I liked the idea for this collection, and that's what, urged me to pick this up in the first place, because it's a very interesting concept, and the issues talked about were important, but I think I wanted more from it. It discussed some of the typical issues that women are having in today's world, like inequality in the workplace, our male-dominated government and religion, body issues women face, like body shaming, yet being only appreciated for their bodies and whatnot, and why these things are important. I just kind of always want more from things that discuss feminism. So this to me seemed very typical and nothing new or different, I guess. I'm not really going to get into it here, but some of the things feminism discusses just aren't enough for me. Like, they usually talk about how women are not equal to men, but they don't really discuss how what is essentially feminine isn't considered important, or how this affects men. Yes, this turned it on its head with men being the victims, but it was exploring our typical issues. It doesn't, it didn't explore how our patriarchal society affects men and their relationships with women, etc. I'm not really gonna get into it much further than that. But the point is, for most feminist works, I just find that I don't get enough out of them, and that they don't really discuss some different issues. So while the topics are important and while the idea was cool, other than that, I didn't love it. When I read poetry, I really want there to be beautiful writing and to be emotionally impacted. And the writing was really not anything exciting in this collection. And I was not remotely emotionally impacted. So yeah, just okay. Wouldn't totally recommend this poetry collection. The third book I read this month was Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This was published in 2002, and it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize that same year. And I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and it was my favorite book of the month. So this is Victorian historical fiction, and it follows a young woman named Susan Trinder who lives in a den of thieves, or fingersmiths. And one day she becomes involved in an intricate plot to steal a woman named Maud's fortune. So she goes out to the country estate where Maud lives and becomes her lady's maid, and the story goes from there. And so the novel is told in a really interesting way. It's in alternating perspectives between Susan and Maud. And so the first section of the book is Susan's viewpoint, and then you get that entire story that you just read, but from Maud's point of view. And that sounds uninteresting maybe because you're reading the same part of the story twice, but it was so amazingly done, and you find out so much, and there's so many twists and turns, and then the novel continues from there in alternating perspectives again. This was such a page-turnery book, I guess you could call it. There were just such wonderful twists and turns that you never saw coming around every bend. There's a fabulous lesbian love story, which is not something I usually come across, to be honest, but it was done very well. And it was a wonderful Victorian historical fiction novel. I really think Sarah Waters did a wonderful job with it. I read another Victorian historical fiction novel, I think last month, called Elijah's Mermaid by S.E. Fox, and I was disappointed by it. And this was everything that I would want a Victorian historical fiction novel to be. So this was really well done and just fabulous. This is my first Sarah Waters book, and I will definitely be picking up more Sarah Waters in the future because this was amazing. The fourth book I read this month was a bind-up of 2 novellas by Henry James, Daisy Miller, and then The Turn of the Screw. So the first one, Daisy Miller, was published in 1878, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. This novella follows an American girl, Daisy Miller, who is traveling abroad, and a man named Winterbourne, who is also an American who has been living abroad, and they meet in Switzerland. And this novella follows Winterbourne's perception of Daisy Miller. He's both attracted to her and yet a little mystified by her independence and freer manners. So this novella kind of explores changing feminine behaviors and the difference between the New World and the Old. A lot of people think because Daisy Miller is so independent and free that this means that she's not innocent, that she's tarnished. But in this novella, it kind of explores how, you can be independent and free and still be innocent. So in that way, it explores some of the changing feminine behaviors, and I quite liked it. I wasn't really sure whether I would like it or not. I only read it because I wanted to read The Turn of the Screw, so that's why I got this bind up, but I ended up really enjoying Daisy Miller. It was a lovely little novella, and it was interesting, and I liked Daisy Miller, and I like the themes and exploration of her character. The Turn of the Screw, on the other hand, was published in 1898, and I also gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So The Turn of the Screw is a rather ambiguous ghost story. It follows a governess who goes to live on a country estate and take care of these 2 children named Flora and Miles. And while she's there, she starts to see these 2 sinister figures around the estate. It reads at first like a very typical ghost story, but it is anything but a typical ghost story. The governess is a very unreliable narrator, and you question what's going on. Is it really a ghost story, or is it more psychological? Is it all in her head, and why, and what are her issues? These are all explored, and it's never what you expect it to be. And even at the end, it's left to you to make sense of it. Henry James doesn't wrap it up neatly. There's no explanation. Apparently, he never even in real life explained what it all means. So for some people, it might be rather frustrating that, they don't get an explanation if you like explanations, but it's super fascinating because there are so many things that could be the truth of what's going on in this novel. There's a lot of interesting essays too and whatnot that I read afterwards about people exploring this novel and what they think, or this novella, and exploring what they think it means, because it's definitely one that you can really delve into and try to figure out. And it was very interesting. It's very interesting ghost story / psychological story, and I really enjoyed it. So I ended up really enjoying both these novellas by Henry James. I had read a novel of his previously to reading these, The Wings of the Dove, which was very interesting in its own right. That was very stream of consciousness type writing, and these were not. So pretty different, and I'm enjoying Henry James so far, and I really hope to read more of his work soon. I've heard some bad things about Henry James. I wasn't sure whether I would enjoy this, but I really haven't found any particular problems with his work yet. I hear a lot of people say he's a misogynist, but I don't really know if I see that, to be honest. So you always have to take into account the time this was written in, It's not going to be up to modern standards, but I definitely don't see any problems, and I'm enjoying his work. So that was it. The last book I read this month was Odd Thomas by Dean Koontz. This was published in 2003, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I decided to read this because Dean Koontz comes into where I work like at least once a week, so I see him all the time, and I thought since I'm a reader, it was about time that I got to one of his books. So this definitely falls into the crime and thriller genre, which is not something I typically read, but I love ghost stories, and the main character in this, Odd Thomas, can see ghosts, so that's kind of what inspired me to pick up this one versus another one of his books. So the story, of course, follows Odd Thomas. It's written in his first-person perspective. He lives in this smallish town in Southern California called Pico Mundo. He's a short-order cook there, and he just tries to help people out with his gift of seeing dead people. So one day, this strange-looking man comes into town, and he's followed by these dark, shadowy spirits called Bodaks, which usually foretell death of some kind, but on a large scale. And so Odd Thomas tries to beat the clock and find out what's going on so he can save the town from disaster, or at least, help out so that there's less disaster than there would be otherwise. It was a very fast paced book, very page turnery, which is something I'm not really used to reading. This was definitely more genre fiction than literary fiction, and I tend to only read literary fiction, so that was different. But I liked it. It was interesting. It was fun, which sounds weird, but Odd Thomas's voice was really lovely. I really liked his perspective. I really liked him as a character. His perspective was just funny and warm-hearted and very easy to relate to. I really like how he's a very humble hero. He doesn't have lofty ambitions. He just wants to help people with his gift and be with his girlfriend Stormy, who he's madly in love with. And other than that, he's okay with where he is in life. He doesn't have these lofty ambitions, and it's kind of nice to read about such a humble and relatable character. So this was a lot more fun and more interesting than I thought it would be, and I think I will pick up another one of his books soon, and I'm glad that I did. So those are all the books that I read in May. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to read individual reviews for each of these books, I have those up on Tumblr and on Goodreads, where you can also follow me if you don't already. I'll put links to both of those in the description box below. And I will see you in my next video.